Everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. We are really glad to have you here for the Indigenous Environmental Network's Policy Mass Call. My name is Ashley Engel. I am an Oglala Lakota and absentee Shawnee guest on Osage lands here in so-called Oklahoma. I use she and they pronouns, and I am the Green New Deal coordinator with the Indigenous Environmental Network. We're going to go ahead and jump into the call in just a moment, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and give people some time to arrive and, go ahead and say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from, what brought you here today. Also let us know what your pronouns are and whose land you're on. Also, if you're on social media, please go ahead and give this a like and share it out. And we'll go ahead and get started. So yeah, a quick agenda. So today we're going to go ahead and start by giving you an overview of what's happening in Congress, share with you the strategies that are currently being advanced by both the Congressional Progressive Caucus and many progressive orgs, give you our take and lay out some of the problems that we've identified with both the Bipartisan Infrastructure Package and the Build Back Better Act. Cool. Well, okay, let's get started. So if you have questions, please go ahead and plug those in the chat. We'll go ahead and do our best to answer those throughout the process of this call. But really, we really just want to spend this time and the bulk of this time today sharing with you, our friends and our relatives, all the information that we think that you should know about this really important moment in politics. So let's dive in. So here, let's go ahead and start with this overview of Congress and the state of play. So today is a really important moment in the entire process of the bipartisan infrastructure and Build Back Better / reconciliation process. Today is the day that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that she was planning to bring a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure package to the House floor. So what's happening in the background, or what's happening right now as we speak, is that there are ongoing negotiations between Speaker Pelosi, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and others to determine how to move forward. Because the Congressional Progressive Caucus is currently saying that they are going to vote no on the bipartisan infrastructure package unless Senate passes and sends over a structure and a format for the reconciliation package simultaneously. So Congressional Progressive Caucus, our friends up there, and our friends and many of the other progressive orgs who engage at this level of policy are really saying that they want to see both the bipartisan infrastructure package and the Build Back Better Act pass through Congress at the same time. So what's happening on the flip side is that we have obstructionists like Senator Manchin, Sinema, and others who are saying, we want to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure now. We want that to go through the House now, and we will send the reconciliation package later. The reason why Congressional Progressive Caucus is worried about this happening is because if that does proceed in that manner where the bipartisan infrastructure package is voted on and the reconciliation package is not complete, there isn't a top line number that people can agree on in Congress, then it's very, very likely that the number that is 3.5 trillion for the reconciliation package as we speak will be chipped away tremendously. And so also going on in the background, and this is news that actually just hit today, we actually found out that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Manchin had actually entered into an agreement this summer that specifies and lays out Senator Manchin's ideas of what he will actually go along with and the top line number that he will not exceed. And so that number on that letter that was just leaked today, and you can go and find that letter on Politico and other places as well. That number is only 1.5 trillion. So the reason why we feel like this is really problematic is because all along, we've been pushing the Thrive Act and the Thrive Agenda, which lays out a $10 trillion investment for all of these packages that we're talking about today. And so we're already at a position where we have compromised tremendously and really reduced the number and the impact of what this package is going to have on our communities. And so, going from 10 down to 4.5, and then now we're hearing today that it's likely going to be reduced down even further collectively to just 2.5 trillion is a really scary possibility. Not only does that chip away at the investments that our communities really desperately need to combat the climate crisis, it's also going to pour in and have negative impacts by the investments that are going into fossil fuel subsidies, corporate tax giveaways, and other things like that. And so let's go ahead and move into our take, and we're just going to go ahead and dive right into this. Let us be frank. As communities on the front lines of that, our situation is dire. While we experienced unparalleled disaster and violence as a result of climate chaos, and this looked like not just the floods, not just the fires, not just the droughts, but police violence against Black bodies. It looks like missing and murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and people. It looks like all of these different, crises that are happening to our migrant relatives at the so-called border. All of these things we can contribute to climate chaos. We know that United States elected leadership is in the position right here, right now, in this moment, to redirect course on behalf of Mother Earth and future generations. The truth is, Congress promised our communities they would work to solve the climate crisis and advance environmental justice once we elected them into office. But instead, we see them fighting to fund fossil fuels and false promises that are masquerading as climate solutions to the tune of billions of dollars. Rather than solving climate change, Congress right now, with this plan as it currently stands, is exacerbating it. So over the course of really positive engagement over the last several months with different members of Congress, their staffers, different congressional committees on both the House and the Senate, we've asked Congress, and we've received many assurances that the provisions, the technologies, and the projects that are in the bipartisan infrastructure package and the Build Back Better Act, or the reconciliation package, will support Indigenous, Black, Brown, Asian, and Pacific Islanders, communities of color, low-income, migrant, and frontline communities to address environmental injustice. The truth is that we need to disproportionately invest in communities like ours, who for generations have been disproportionately not invested in at all. So while we are certainly happy to claim our wins, which we attribute to and we see as a testament to the power of our movements and of frontline intervention in federal policy, it is also important for us to name what is missing and also what is harmful in these packages. Specifically, we demanded that Congress oppose false clean energy solutions that are present in the Clean Electricity Performance Program, which is also known as the CEPP. We also asked them to include set-asides for frontline communities and include both Justice 40 and climate standards in the Build Back Better Act. Unfortunately, these important requests and demands are being undermined through a political process that is intentionally designed to silence the voices of us, of impacted communities, while at the same time maintaining the status quo. So Congress claims that these packages will be historical provisions for climate action and environmental justice. But you know what? We know better. While we have fought hard for measures including increased care, social safeguards, affordable housing, building upgrades, public transit, and paid sick leave, there are many components of these two packages that will actually deepen injustices, entrench climate impacts, displace families, upend local economies, and deadlock us into a decade of false solutions and fossil fuels. We cannot be complicit by letting it proceed without challenge, because we are accountable to you, to our communities, to the front lines. We have to be accountable through this process and let you know what's happening and let you know where we stand. It is imperative that we make clear our position while also explaining the environmental and community harm, as well as the human rights impacts that these legislative measures will perpetuate. Bottom line, we all know that Congress promised our communities that they would fight to end the climate crisis once we elected them into office, but instead we see them fighting for this infrastructure bill and this reconciliation package that will collectively pour billions of dollars into fossil fuels and false solutions that are responsible for exacerbating the climate crisis. So what exactly are the wins? And so, you know what? We do want to claim these wins. We have been engaging, throughout this process, and we have been able to intervene in different ways to ensure that some of our priorities and language is put forward. But the truth is, these harms don't override those wins. And we need to continue this engagement and continue to intervene and include frontline voices in these policy spaces to ensure that Congress is listening to us and that they are centering our voices and ensuring that policy meets the demands of the communities they are seeking to help. And so, I'm going to go ahead and lay out now some of the problems that we've identified with these two packages, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Package and the Build Back Better Act, and explain how they actually conflict with environmental justice principles. So beginning with Justice 40. Justice 40 pledge will not be met in the infrastructure packages. We are, really disappointed and saddened to, learn this through our engagement with not only the Department of Energy and Shalonda Baker and the Justice 40 initiative happening there, but also ensuring to making sure that Congress implements it, ensures that it can be implemented by legislating it. And you know what? The administration's pledge is not going to be met in these infrastructure packages. Frontline communities were promised 40% of funding to be earmarked for projects that will build safer and stronger communities in order to confront the climate emergency. We already see a structure being set up that would actually allow for this funding to be used as quote unquote benefits and not direct funding. These so-called benefits could actually take the form of harmful programs, and some that should have happened anyway. Further, there's a mapping tool that's being built that replicates old colonial mapping systems to differentiate whether a community will actually fall under their criteria or not. And as Indigenous people who live in cities, who live in the country, who live on the reservation, who live, off the reservation as well, we know that this just, fitting us under one definition of, how to define what an Indigenous community looks like just really won't cut it. We need to be more thorough and more inclusive than that. And of course, in these packages, especially under the BIF, of course, we will admit, while there are funding set aside mechanisms for tribes, they are actually inadequate and they are absent in a robust recognition of Indigenous sovereignty, as well as assurances for free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC. The federal government just straight up is obligated through laws, trust responsibilities, treaties, and other policies to ensure that funding under Justice 40 and other federal programs to Indigenous nations is more than adequate to address significant disparities that are resulting from decades and generations and centuries of colonization. And we're going to go to move into the next point, which is really around NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act. So NEPA is designed to ensure that agencies and departments consider the significant environmental consequences of their proposed actions and to inform the public about that decision making. However, the bipartisan infrastructure bill includes language to suppress public input, to shorten the permitting processes, to determine how a project will impact a community, to shrink consideration of alternative approaches, and create large exclusions for multiple categories of projects. So this is just another way to silence and erase our communities and cut us out from the processes that impact us directly. Now let's move to energy and water. So let's talk about fossil fuel subsidies. These are included in both packages. The bipartisan infrastructure bill has $25 billion slated for new fossil fuel subsidies. Additionally, the Build Back Better Act actually includes at least $15 billion as it stands. This does not even include the subsidies for fake so-called clean energy provisions in the CEPP. And ramping up fossil fuel development locks us into decades of extractivism, violence against our communities, and furthers the injustice that our people have experienced for generations of extraction. Now let's move up to, and talk about what's happening to our relatives up in Alaska. So with the Alaska Liquefied Natural Gas Export Terminal that is being funded through the bipartisan infrastructure package, and the oil and gas development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge being expanded, we know that our communities in the Arctic are going to be suffering even more. And because oftentimes their voices are not brought to the forefront of Indigenous fights, we're gonna have to make sure that we keep our eyes on what's happening up in Alaska and the Arctic even closer, to make sure that our relatives aren't being hit by the wayside, and that this doesn't move forward without that resistance and without that voice and uplifting that our relatives need. All right, let's move into something that is a little controversial around, the progressive circles. The Indigenous Environmental Network, we take a hard line against false solutions. And what we're seeing now in the Clean Electricity Performance Program, or the CEPP, in the Build Back Better Act, is that it provides incentive payments and does not penalize utility corporations for the generation of electricity from fossil fuels and false solutions. This includes fossil gas with and without carbon capture and storage and other fossil-based technologies, waste, incineration, and other combustion-based technologies, bioenergy, including biomass, biofuels, factory farm gas, landfill gas and wood pellets, hydrogen, nuclear, and new large-scale and ecosystem-altering hydropower, and all market-based accounting systems like offsets. Earlier this year, over 700 groups endorsed a letter to fight for distributed renewable energy for frontline communities. We were largely ignored. Instead, the CEPP is being touted as the flagship program for climate action. We cannot keep providing billions of dollars to these industries and pretend like it is a win for climate justice, because it's not. This false clean energy will actually increase the pollution burden on Indigenous, Black, people of color, and frontline communities. Instead of funding these false solutions, the funding should actually be allocated to distributed renewable energy for wind and solar, with 40% clearly set aside for frontline communities like ours. Lead service line replacement is earmarked at $15 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which would only address approximately 25% of lead service lines and resign multiple generations to compromised health. The House has included an additional $30 billion for lead pipes replacement in their version of the budget. However, no clear commitment has come out of the Senate, making the total amount of funds for lead pipes replacement uncertain. Billions more are needed to ensure that Indigenous, Black, brown, low-income communities and communities of color have access to safe and clean drinking water, as well as sewage line installation. And you heard me talking a little bit earlier about false solutions. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap back around and address this a little bit more clearly. And so, false solutions are being funded in both packages. This is why our statement that came out today says a decade of false solutions, because we really believe that these packages, as they currently stand, will actually deadlock our communities in at least a decade of false solutions and fossil fuels. We're already seeing talks of carbon capture pipelines being built over the easements of the Dakota Access Pipeline. So, this is the fight of tomorrow. Like one of our relatives at IEN, Joy Braun, likes to say, yesterday and today, we're fighting these tar sands pipelines, but tomorrow we're going to be fighting carbon pipelines. And some of this funding is actually as direct funding, like in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill and Build Back Better Act, and other funding through the CEPP in the Build Back Better Act. But I'm going to go ahead and right now read off a list of just some of the false solutions that we oppose that are currently present in these packages. And I'm hoping that this, will help others, orient a little bit more around where our position on false solutions stands. And so I'm going to read this off. Carbon capture in all of its form, CO2 utilization products for plastics, 45Q tax credit for enhanced oil recovery, also known as EOR, that is expanded in the Build Back Better Act until 2032. The $1.9 billion in loan guarantees for carbon capture pipelines that is present in the bipartisan infrastructure package, direct air capture, geoengineering technologies, bioenergy, incineration, cap and trade, offsets, carbon tax and carbon pricing, nuclear energy, landfill gas, climate smart agriculture, agriculture and soils offsets, liquefied natural gas, fossil fuel heat waste, hydrogen and hydrogen hubs. Fossil hydrogen is given a rebate in the Build Back Better Act, and it's actually considered carbon neutral. And just to point to this really quick, we already have relatives, our relatives who are out in the, Paiute and Shoshone relatives out in Nevada who are fighting lithium mining. And so, these many of these false solutions, these fights are already here. We already have relatives in Dene territory who are fighting nuclear. And so, up our Lakota relatives, up in the Black Hills who are fighting uranium. So these fights are already on our doorsteps. And these funding mechanisms that are currently present in these two packages are only going to ensure that more of these fights are coming to our doorsteps and that our communities are entrenched in even more battles against these horrible and egregious solutions, or false solutions actually, to the climate crisis. And moving forward, also moving on, clean coal and coal waste, this is also present. Chemical recycling, such as, burning plastic incinerators, that is funded in the BIF, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Package. Carbon taxes that have been proposed to actually fund the entire Build Back Better Act. And carbon pricing that has been proposed. And while everyone has been distracted, a cap and trade program for HFCs was actually passed outside of the infrastructure packages to be administered through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And, and this is important, what happens now, even though it seems like it's not a big deal, or maybe people feel like it's not, maybe people feel like this isn't something that we need to be attuned to. The reality is that the COP26 in Glasgow is just a month away. And what happens in this fight here, stateside in the United States, is going to have major impact and bearing on the negotiations that happen at a global level. And we're going to be further harming our relatives south of the border and Indigenous and Black communities all over the globe if we allow this to go by, and we allow this to go by without challenge. And so, you know what? Congress is really demonstrating what happens when frontline and impacted communities are not centered in federal policy. Life-saving priorities are watered down, or what we're seeing, completely abandoned through the process. While at the same time, greedy and harmful corporations come out on top. The truth is, we learned that many in Congress are not fully invested in frontline communities or solving the climate emergency. We can think of, the Exxon crew who are, being lobbied by Exxon, the mansions, the cinemas, the congressional members in Texas who are really fighting back. And even though they say they care about our communities just to win our votes. And this is why, and this is where you come in. This is where all of us come in. This is why it is vital, absolutely vital, that we continue engaging and pushing Congress to remain accountable to the promises that they made us and other constituencies. We know that the power, the true power, lies with the people power. And now is the moment to stand in that power and to stand on the right side of history on behalf of Mother Earth and on behalf of future generations. So rather than pretend that this legislation that as it currently stands, that, that is being debated, being discussed, possibly being voted on tonight, right now, while this is happening, we don't want to pretend like this legislation does not perpetuate injustices to Indigenous, Black, and frontline communities. And we also don't want to pretend like this legislation does not exacerbate the climate crisis. So we will continue to stand with frontline struggles. We will continue to uplift principles of environmental and economic justice. We will continue to hold congressional members, committees, staffers, and our progressive allies accountable. And we'll also continue to demand that Congress does the same. So you know what? This was, just a quick call. It was just something, to make sure that everybody could get on the same page and hear our position. And so I just want to say thank you so much tonight for attending. We see questions that are in the chat. We'll further expand on those throughout the weeks, because we don't anticipate that this fight is going to end here tonight. We don't see any resolution today, and we only anticipate that over at least the course of the next couple of weeks, that we are really going to be battling on behalf of frontline communities to ensure that these provisions that are being watered down and that are being weeded out are included in the package at the end of the day. And so thank you so much, Niyawe, everybody, for attending this mass call. Of course, we will keep you updated. Please stay tuned to the Indigenous Environmental Network, our social medias, our website, and our list serves just to hear more updates. We will make sure to stay on top of this, to stay on top of what's happening with Congress, and to relay any of this information that we have to all of our relatives here who joined us today and who are fighting on the front lines and don't have time to be wading through all of this mess that's happening at the federal level. So again, I'm Ashley with Indigenous Environmental Network. I want to say Niyawe and Wopila again. Please, everybody, stay safe, stay blessed, prayers up. Self-care is so crucial right now. There is so much loss and heartache and stress in the world right now. We need to take care of ourselves and each other so that we can fight on behalf of this earth, Unchimaka, and future generations. Niawe, everyone. Good night. Sweet.